Very good afternoon to one and all in this special public webinar, which today we have with us two eminent speakers, Professor Hema Somanathan from School of Biology, Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Thiruvananthapuram, and followed by another interesting talk by Professor Sandeep Shukla, Department of Computer Science, IIT Kanpur. And Professor Hema will be talking to us on the topic ecosystem services provided by bees in a changing world. And this whole program is part of the school outreach program, which the National Academy of Sciences India Delhi chapter and the Diyal Upadhyay College is organizing under the aegis of the Department of Biotechnology's Star College program. And before inviting Professor Hema, let me briefly introduce to all of you. So Hema Somanathan completed her PhD from University of Bombay working on plant-pollinator interactions. Subsequently, she was a Wenner-Gren postdoctoral fellow at Lund University, Sweden from 2006 to 2009, working on the sensory ecology of nocturnal and diurnal bees. She joined IISER Thiruvananthapuram as assistant professor in August 2009. Her research interests lie in understanding the evolutionary ecology of plant-pollinator interactions, behaviour of social and solitary bees, and collective behavior in social spiders. With these words, I now invite Professor Hema to kindly share her screen and deliver her talk.
Thank you, Professor Saxena, and to all the organizers for this opportunity to talk about some of my research and also to provide a general introduction into ecosystem services that are provided by bees and why this is important in the current context where we have climate change, habitat modification, deforestation, fragmentation, and so on. So today I hope to give you a flavor for what are these issues that we should be worrying about. So I hope my screen is visible.
You have to share your screen again.
Okay.
You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, so sorry about that. There was some glitch.
No problem.
I don't know what happened, but let me just try and share my screen now.
Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah.
Is it visible, the screen?
Yeah, we can see your desktop.
Okay.
Once you will share, open up your presentation, then you can see that.
Let me just minimize this. Yeah, is my presentation?
Yes. You can put it in the slideshow.
Okay. Is it visible?
You have to change the display setting.
Display settings.
Yes.
Is it okay now?
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So thank you all for taking time out to listen to this talk. And I hope that by the end of this talk, I would have left you with some impression of ecosystem services that are provided by bees and why we should be worrying about it in the current scenario where we have climate change, rapid change of habitats, which renders things very unsuitable in many cases for bees and also other pollinators. So to just give you a very general introduction, when we talk about bees, we or any other pollinators, okay, these are dependent on flowers for food, which means that they visit flowers to obtain nectar and pollen, as many of you will be aware of that. And this relationship is a very ancient one. Okay, so it dates back to the late Cretaceous period, when and we see that these are very, we call these as mutualisms, because the plant is benefited and the animal or the pollinator species is also benefited. Okay, so these mutualisms are in general evolutionarily very ancient and conserved. Okay. Now, the reason why pollinators visit plants is because they are attracted to various, sort of characteristics of the flower. So it could be the color that attracts bees and other pollinators. It could be the scent or the fragrance. And of course, they are there because they want to collect rewards. And also there might be, the morphology of the flower is such that it allows the bees or other pollinators to land and drink nectar or collect pollen, from these floral structures. So therefore, for a very long time, from the time of Darwin onwards, people have examined, various kinds of animals visiting flowers. And there was an attempt, okay, to sort of categorize flowers on the basis, or categorize flowers and pollinators on the basis of these floral traits. Okay, so what I mean by that is that they would observe pollinators, for example, observe moths that are visiting, a particular flower, and then try and say that, okay, the plants that are visited by moths tend to have a certain set of characteristics, and whereas the plants or the flowers that are visited by bees tend to have a different set of characteristics. So we are surrounded all the time by this kind of tremendous diversity in terms of pollinators and in terms of plants. Okay. Now you can see here on the screen that there is, a tremendous variety in shapes, in colors, in morphology, and so on and so forth. And each of these are visited by bees. Okay. Now, if you look at any ancient literature, there is a mention of flowers being beautiful, being scented, and so on. However, all of these traits are actually there in order to attract bees and other flower visiting pollinators, because what the plant gets in return is reproductive fitness, because they transfer pollen onto stigmas, and then there is fruit set and seed formation and so on. Okay, so therefore, if you were to look at a flower, what it looks like to humans and what it looks like to a pollinator, such as a bee, would be very different. And the reason why it's different is because you can see, for example, in these, in the flowers that I show here, you can see that there are some patterns towards the center or towards the tips. Some of these patterns are not visible to humans because we don't have, a UV receptor. We can't see the UV patterns that are present on these flowers. So therefore, how this flower, the same flower, appears to a human and how it appears to a bee or a butterfly or a moth or a fly would be very, very different. Okay. For this reason, flowers are also called, you all know what is a billboard, right? We all the time we see advertisements which hit us, especially in cities, advertising all kinds of products. So therefore, we can think of flowers as something like a billboard, or they're like sending out signals, and these are sensory signals. We call them as sensory billboards because they're advertising to the animals or to the pollinators using the visual modality, which means color, pattern, shape, and so on, or using the olfactory modality, which is basically fragrance, or even texture. All of these are cues which pollinators might use in order to decide whether to visit a flower or not. Now, I was just mentioning that human vision and pollinator vision is a little different. Okay. So we see color. Okay, we are very visual animals, and we see color, and we have three different kinds of cones, right? So we have the blue, the green, and the red cones. Whereas if you look at a bee, the bee also has three different kinds of photoreceptors. However, the bee lacks a red receptor and instead has a UV receptor. You can see here, right? 350 nanometers. That is in the UV region of the wavelength. And so this is the reason why a flower that appears to us as a yellow flower on the top is very different. You can see, all these patterns on the flower in the bottom, and that is how a flower would appear to a bee, because we lack a UV receptor, which the bees have. Okay, so it is not, so therefore, as early as in the 17th century, Springle made this comment that flowers, the colors in flowers exist not to please human senses, but to please those of bees and other flower visiting insects. Now, let me not get into this particular thing. Now, why? So I'm just talking today mainly about color, right? But we also have pattern, shape, texture, fragrance, and so on. All of these are attractive qualities of a flower or traits in a flower that attract pollinators. Now, when we look at one of these modalities, that is when we look at color, you can see here on the top left that, this is a blue flower against a green background in bright light. So of course you can make out the blue color against a green background. If the light levels were to drop, and most of us have experienced that when you walk into a dark room, you don't see things in color. We revert to black and white vision, or it's also called achromatic vision. And what we would see instead is, you can still discern, or you can still make out the shapes of flowers, but it's not as clear as it is during the daytime. Okay. Now, if we didn't have color vision, so under dim light levels, you can see how, it becomes extremely difficult when, just under starlight, to actually make out the shapes of flowers from the leaves, from the background leaves. Okay. So this is what it would be like under bright, if we didn't have if we didn't have color vision, this is what it would appear to us as in bright light or during the daytime. But in dim light conditions, you can see that it becomes very difficult for us to actually make out where the flower is. And so pollinators face similar challenges in order to see flowers at night. Yeah, so that's what we think. So therefore, for many centuries, biologists have been interested in answering this question as to whether selection by pollinators drove the evolution of floral traits. Did they drive the evolution of color, scents, and all of pattern, and so on and so forth? Now, here is a nice example of a moth. You can see here, this is a moth which has a really long, you can see the tongue of this moth is more than 30 centimeters in length. Okay, and this corresponds to the length of this tube of the orchid, from which it has to probe and obtain nectar, which is present at the base of this orchid. So when these kind of sort of, phenomena were documented, of course, people began to sort of think about the tongue of the moth and the corolla length of the flower to have co-evolved, or to have evolved in response to each other. Okay, so therefore, there has been this, for a long time, people have described these mutualisms as co-evolutionary events. Okay, and also there was a tendency to try and classify or categorize these kind of interactions between plants and pollinators as pairwise interactions, meaning that they are interactions between one type of flower and one type of pollinator. Okay, so you can see that, the way the field evolved, if you look at the early literature, a lot of studies will talk about a plant being visited by a species of pollinator. Okay, so very tight kind of obligate mutualisms was what people thought, the plant-animal interactions or plant-pollinator interactions were about. Now, today we have a lot more information. And, there, of course, there is this, there is still an attempt to sort of categorize flowers and pollinators into what we call as syndromes by assigning certain sets of traits to a particular pollinator. Okay, certain set of floral traits to a particular pollinator. For example, in the bird pollination syndrome, if you look at the literature, there is an attempt to sort of say that bird pollinated flowers are either red in color or they have dilute lots and lots of nectar, and the anthers are exerted and there's a very long corolla tube and so on. Whereas if you look at bee pollinated flowers, they tend to be purple or blue or yellow in color. They have concentrated nectar, and also the flowers tend to be short and white, okay, and so on and so forth. So these interactions or these mutualisms were sort of categorized as syndromes, okay. Now, however, since the field, there has been a lot of, there's a very, very rich literature on pollination biology. And today, when we look at entire communities, what we can see is that you have, so what you have here is a network. And what does this network actually tell you? You have all the pollinators in a particular ecosystem lined up here. So these could be bees, it could be moths, butterflies, and so on, flies, and so on and so forth. And then you have all the plants in that particular ecosystem. And so all these connections that you see, okay, each of this is a node, and then you have a connection, actually tells you which plants are connected to which pollinators and which pollinators are connected to which plants. So even if you were to just visually look at this diagram, you will see that it appears that most pollinators visit multiple plants and vice versa. Most plants are also visited by multiple pollinators. So what the field started out by describing as pairwise tight mutualisms, obligate mutualisms, is much more of a rarity. And what is much more common is this kind of a loose network where multiple pollinators are connected to a plant species, and a plant species is visited by multiple pollinators. Okay, so this kind of a system is what more and more ecosystems, as we study more and more habitats across the world, whether it's in the tropics or temperate regions, this appears to be the dominant structure of these plant pollinator mutualisms. Yeah. So what is the advantage of this is that you can imagine that when you have tight obligate correlations between a particular plant and a particular pollinator, of course, such systems are much more vulnerable to extinction or disturbance. But however, when you have a loose network like this, where plants are serviced by multiple pollinators and pollinators are visiting multiple plants, so then there is much more redundancy in the system, which means that they're much more robust, and they even if there are disturbances, or even if there is some sort of a there's some pollinators are either becoming rare or becoming extinct, so then there are others that could potentially fill that gap. Okay, so therefore this kind of a structure makes sense evolutionarily, because ecologically, because it does provide the system becomes robust and it provides redundancy within the system. When we look at these networks, as I'm showing you in this cartoon here, we see that flowers of different kinds are visited by multiple pollinators. Okay, many of them are insects, and insect pollination is very common. But you also have mammals and birds and other kinds of even bats which might pollinate flowers. However, insect pollination is very prevalent. And among insects, if you were to look at it globally, we know that bees are important pollinators in a wide range of ecosystems, whether it be in the tropics or whether it be in the temperates. So therefore, it follows from this that the persistence of bees in a habitat, okay, the ability of bees to forage in a habitat successfully, which leads to pollination of plants, which in turn leads to fruit and flower production, fruit and seed production, is very important, not just for plants to persist, but also for pollinators to persist and to support biodiversity in a particular habitat. Okay. Now, here are this is a short list from a very long list of plants that are, receive pollination services from bees. Now, what you can see here is that many of these are cultivated plants, and we are familiar with these because these are important in, our diet, in human diet. So I've just put up cultivated food plants here. If you were to look at wild plants, it is estimated that, about 90% of flowering plants are dependent on animal pollinators, and 75% of food crops that we depend on globally are also dependent on animal pollinators. Okay, 35% of this is just to give you some statistics, 35% of the global agriculture depends on animal pollination, okay, predominantly bee pollination. And therefore, it is important for us to, conserve bees and to protect the habitat for bees so that, the rest of biodiversity is also conserved. And also, bees are very important in terms of food security, to eliminate hunger, poverty elimination, and all of this depends on the health of pollinator services, which in turn depends on the health of pollinators themselves. So when we talk about bees, and in recognition of this important role of bees, 20th May has been recognized by the United Nations as the World Bee Day in recognition of the importance of bees as an ecosystem service provider. And if you look at bees, there might be social bees. All of you must have seen honeybees, but there are also solitary bees that live alone or in very small family units. And all of them are pollen and nectar feeders. A large majority are pollen and nectar feeders, and they are important pollinators. They're also called central place foragers because they have a hive or a nest from where they travel in the landscape, find flowers, and bring back food to the hive or to the nest, okay? Because they are feeding not just for themselves, but they're also bringing back food for the colony, okay? In the case of social bees, and in the case of solitary bees, then they're bringing back, food often for the offspring and so on. So this is the reason why they're called central place foragers, very much like how we have a home from where we go out, seek employment, food, resources, and then we also always come back to a central place. So similar to that, bees also have a central place from where they traverse in search of food, and then they come back to the nest. So what you have here is a honeybee, and you can see that it has just visited a chili flower, and you can see the pollen that it carries from this particular flower on the legs, and this is carried back. Some of it is transferred to other flowers on other plants to cause pollination, but a large quantity is actually taken back to the nest and stored within the hive as food for the developing larvae, for the developing brood, and so on. So when we look at honeybees, right, because honeybees are famous and they are globally important as pollinators of wild plants as well as crop plants, and they live in these big gigantic colonies. Okay, so this is the colony of an Asian honeybee, which is called Apis dorsata. And honeybee colonies are organized in such a way that you have a queen. A queen is the reproductive individual. And then you have the drone, which is a male, which mates with the queen. Okay. And then you have the workers. Okay. The workers are all females, but they're usually sterile females. And they do all the work of gathering food for the needs of the colony. They take care of the brood. They take care of hygiene requirements within the colony and so on. So here what you can see is the different castes in honeybees. So there are workers that are engaged in building a comb structure. They have wax glands from which they prepare these cells. Within these cells, you have the eggs and the stores of food, that is nectar and pollen. And then there are guard bees, which guard the entrance of the nest from, defending it from predators and so on. And then you have bees that will even gather water. If it is a hot, dry summer day, then there are even foragers that will gather water. And of course, there are foragers, workers that will carry back pollen and nectar from flowers and store them in these cells as food for the colony. Now, as bees go about this business of finding flowers, we know that they travel long distances. For example, in the honeybee, which is Apis mellifera, and this is the European honeybee or the Western honeybee, we know that they can travel from the nest location. They can actually travel even distances of 10 kilometers. So that is a really long distance for a tiny bee. And they travel these distances in order to find food. And usual flights may not be as long as 10 kilometers. It may be within 1 or 2 kilometers. because there is plenty of resources close to the hive. But however, during seasons when food is scarce, then they have to travel much further, and they are known to do this in a landscape. Now, the nice thing about bees is that we know a lot about bees because of the work of this gentleman here. You may recognize Carl von Frisch. He won the Nobel Prize in 1973. And he has described, I mean, he's done a whole bunch of studies on bees. Okay. So he, for example, he described that bees have color vision, that they can actually see colors in flowers. So, and after Carl von Frisch's work, he's actually started a whole field where, all over the world, there are bee researchers working on various aspects of bees. It may be foraging, it may be pollination, it may be how they flight in bees, navigation, it could be the neurobiology and so on and so forth in bees. And so therefore, there's a wealth of information that we know about bees. Okay. For example, we know that they can use the sun as a compass. Yeah, they can use the sun as a compass for navigation. And they can also use terrestrial landmarks. So they can use a hillock, or they can use a building, and they can use a tree and such structures in order to know where they are with respect to the nest and with respect to the landscape in which they are foraging. We also know today that they can locate flowers using color, pattern, shape, smell, and so on. And the interesting thing about honeybees in particular is that once they have found food, foragers can actually come back to the hive, and they have something called the symbolic dance language, which is called the Waggle Dance. And through this language, they can actually communicate to nestmates the direction and the distance to a patch of flowers that they have located and they have successfully foraged from. So this is, what it generally looks like, just to give you a very brief sort of a thing into Waggle dances as a symbolic language of communication within a colony. A forager that has found food will come back to the hive. And within the hive, she does this sort of a dance, which is also roughly the figure of 8. Okay, she describes the figure of 8 by waggling, and then there's a return phase, and then again a waggle phase and a return phase. And as she does this sort of a waggle dance, there are several other bees that are watching or observing or following the dance. Okay. Now, what these foragers do is that depending on what direction and distance is being coded or is being indicated through the dances, then these foragers or these recruits will then fly off towards that particular resource. And all of this makes the colony much more efficient. Okay, so it makes them, instead of each bee finding food on her own, which is probably very energy intensive, and it's also time consuming, therefore it's not very efficient. But however, through this, communication through which happens through the waggle dance, it just makes communication within a large colony much more efficient, which means that they can gather resources much more efficiently. Each bee, instead of searching on her own, has this information on which she can rely and utilize. Okay. Now, the nice thing or the interesting thing is that the bee is a really tiny animal and has a very, very small brain. Okay. And in this very small brain, just a couple of thousand neurons or so, a thousand neurons, they can learn the location of food. They can learn features of flowers, okay, the shape of flowers. They can memorize the color of flowers, the appearance of flowers, the smell of flowers. And they also have spatial memory of landscape features. And using all of this, they can actually form short-term as well as long-term memories from all of these experiences and use that when they are foraging within a landscape. Okay. Now, all of this becomes important when you have a social bee colony, as in honeybees, as you see over here, because they need to have this sort of tightly coordinated functioning in order to, sustain their very large colonies with, thousands of developing brood and so on. Is there any questions so far?
Yeah.
I think there are some questions
Yes.
in the chat box.
Yes. I'll take up one by one.
Yeah.
So the first is, although it's a very different aspect, how do bees help in poverty elimination?
Okay. So in many ways, one is, through food security. Bees are, like I was mentioning, they are important pollinators of many crop plants. Okay, in India, many crops like pulses, dals, vegetables like brinjals, lady's finger, tomatoes, all of these and number of fruit crops are dependent on bees for pollination. Okay, so the yields of these crops are dependent on bees for pollination. Okay, so therefore, if you were to look at the average Indian farmers in India are really, a majority of them are marginal farmers with very subsistence kind of farming, half an acre, 1 acre, 2 acres, right? So therefore, since they contribute to agriculture and to agricultural yields, so therefore directly bees are linked to food security. And so therefore, that is what I meant by poverty elimination of hunger and poverty. I hope that's okay.
Sure, I'll take up the next one.
Yeah.
What is the role of solitude bees and how long does a honeybee live?
Okay. So these are called, like I mentioned, there are social bees like the honeybees that live in big hives. And then you have the solitary bees. Okay. Now the solitary bees are or also important for pollination. For example, you may have seen carpenter bees, right? These are big black bees that visit a number of crops in India, and these are important for example, brinjal pollination or for tomato pollination, for many beans, pulses, legumes, all of these. So solitary bees, just like honeybees, provide for pollination. And I'm only talking about crop pollination here. They are also very important for the pollination of wild plants, native plants. And so therefore, they directly are involved in reproductive fitness of plants, persistence of biodiversity, persistence of plant communities, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so that is just like social bees, solitary bees are also important. With respect to how long does a honeybee live, right? So it depends on the species. All right. So there are some species where the total lifespan is just 3 weeks. Okay, this is from egg to sort of till they die as workers. So they become egg, then they become larvae, and then they become adult bees. And the adult bees first do all the jobs within a hive, and then they transition into becoming foragers. So it could be just a few weeks, or it could be a few months. Yeah, so the entire lifespan of bees.
Yeah, okay. So there are two more questions. Uh, what happens after the queen bee dies? Like, who decides who is going to be the next queen bee?
That's a very interesting question. I don't have time to get into the biology of honeybees. I mean, that's like a completely, I could talk uh, for hours about that. However, what I can just tell you very briefly is that I mentioned that the queen is the only reproductive individual in a colony, and there are workers who are, doing the work of collecting food for the colony. Now, when the queen is aging or when the queen dies, then there are workers will feed some of the larvae with a substance which is called royal jelly, and that determines, larvae that are fed with royal jelly by the workers have the potential to develop into new queens. Yeah.
Okay, fine. We can move ahead.
I think bees have 5 eyes. Is
Oh,
that
yes,
true?
there's one more question. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, they do have 5 eyes, and the 2 eyes are the two compound eyes on the sides of the head, right? And on the top of the head, they have 3 eyes, which are like camera eyes. They're simple eyes. Okay. And so the 2 eyes on the sides of the head are the eyes that they use for vision, for locating flowers, for navigation, and so on. And the 3 simple eyes at the top don't have those don't have very high resolution, but they might help the bee to sort of fly in a very oriented manner, and also can tell the bee about which is the skyward direction and which is the landward direction. So they could help to stabilize flights. Okay, so it is true, but these are two different kinds of eyes. Okay, they have two compound eyes and they have 3 simple eyes. So it is correct. Okay, fine. So maybe I can continue.
Sure.
Okay, so we were talking, let us talk a little bit about this dance because it's a very, very fascinating aspect of honeybee behavior. And then I will go on to how we can use the dance to try and understand how bees, how far bees fly, or how do bees use different kinds of landscapes. Okay, so there's a very nice sort of readout in these dances. Just by looking, we can look at the dances of bees or record the dances of bees and then try and understand or try and decipher where has the bee been. Okay, so let us look at what are the steps that are involved in honeybee dances. Okay, so I told you that this waggle dance is done by a successful forager, and you can see all the other bees are observing this forager dancing in this figure of 8 kind of a shape. So this particular dance, waggle dance, involves the following 5 steps. First of all, the bee has to measure the direction in which food is present. Okay, the forager also has to somehow measure the distance that it has flown to that particular food resource or flowers. Then that information has to get coded into the dance. So direction has to be coded into the dance, and distance also has to be coded into the dance. Okay, and then the final step is this transfer of this information from the dancer to the follower bees. Now, today, let us just look at one of these steps because of the want of time. Let us see how bees actually measure the distance that they have flown. Okay, so you have a bee and it goes to it has located flowers or a big bunch of flowering trees about, let's say, a kilometer away. Now, how does a bee know how far it has flown? And so that it can communicate this information through the waggle dance to the follower bees. So that is what we're going to try and look at. Now, so there is something called optic flow. And what is optic flow? A flying bee, okay? Just imagine a bee that has left the hive, okay, and is flying through the landscape. It might be a forest landscape or a grassland or even a city, okay? It doesn't matter what landscape. As they're flying through the landscape, they can measure the visual streaming of the environment. Okay, if you've traveled in a car, very fast, you're traveling in a car or you're traveling in a train. Okay, you see that the environment on either side, right, streams across your eye. You can see that it looks like as if the environment is moving and you are stationary. Okay, so this kind of visual streaming of the environment occurs across the visual field of the bee, okay, on the retina of the bee. And this is somewhat similar to the odometer of a car or a vehicle. Okay, you know what is an odometer, right? You have a little meter there which measures how far as a car traveled, right? If you travel 1 kilometer, then the reading shows as 1 kilometer and so on. So it has some sort of an inbuilt odometer using which it can measure. Using this optic flow, it has this internal odometer which then can tell the bee how far has it flown. Okay, and this information is what it codes into the dance. Now, if it has flown, let us say that a bee has flown over a seam like this at the top. Okay, so this kind of environment is going to result in a lot of optic flow across the retina of the bee. Okay, because you can see it's a very complex environment and there is a lot of visual features and structures in this environment. Whereas if a bee has flown over water or a plain environment like this, there is lesser optic flow that is going to get, sort of stream across the retina of the bee, which means that this bee is going to, experience a lower optic flow. Okay, so if a bee travels 1 kilometer over this habitat versus 1 kilometer over this habitat, the amount of optic flow across the retina is going to be very different. Okay. So this environment will provide greater optic flow, whereas this kind of an environment will provide lesser optic flow. Now let us see how people have used this particular principle. Now what researchers have done, including people in my group, is that we train bees. Okay, so we train bees to come from the hive to a particular feeder. Okay, and this is nothing but some sort of a container that provides sucrose solution, which the bees will discover, and then they come regularly back to it. So they fly back and forth between the hive and the feeder. And then what you do is that you have, tunnels like this, and you have a feeder which is placed at the end. Okay, and these tunnel, you can see that the walls and the floor of this tunnel has some texture, right? It has these black and white patterns, and these patterns are supposed to generate optic flow. Okay, because these are visual structures or visual features in this particular tunnel environment. And depending on the, how packed these structures are, or how packed is the environment. Okay, so this is, if you have an environment which has lesser of this kind of patterns, versus if you have a tunnel where the bee has to fly through, a very, very dense kind of a pattern like this pattern will generate greater optic flow than a pattern which is plain or, or colorless or something like that. Okay, so how do we use this? Now, here is an experiment which has used this principle. You have a bee that flies from the hive, and then it goes to a feeder, and this feeder contains sucrose, right? And this feeder is placed at the entrance to the tunnel. Now the bee goes back to the hive and waggles through the waggle dance. Okay, this is a round dance because it's so close to the hive. It's almost just 0 meters. It's just very, very close to the hive. So, you can see that at very close distances, the dance becomes a round dance. All right. Now, when the feeder is moved into the tunnel, this is a 6-meter long tunnel, and it's placed here. And the bee has to fly through this tunnel. Okay. Now, it's flying through a very textured, visually rich environment. Okay. So a 6-meter distance that this bee has flown, it goes back and waggles. It appears to the bee, or the bee feels that it has traveled a distance of 200 meters. Okay, so just by manipulating this environment, or the texture or the visual features of this environment, you can actually manipulate what the bee is signaling through its waggle dance. If this was not such a rich texture, then it would signal lesser distance than 200 meters. Now, that is exactly what happens over here. Again, this time, the researchers, what they did is they placed the feeder at the end of the tunnel. It's again the same tunnel, but this time there is no pattern on the walls. You can see that it's just a plain wall. Okay. Now, what the bee feels is that it has barely traveled any distance. Okay. So you can see the difference. Here it signals 200 meters, but here, when there is no pattern at all, when it's a plain wall, then it signals that it is close to the hive. Okay, so this experiment and many more researchers have sort of used this technique or used this method to actually try and, sort of see what is it that the bee is actually, using in order to understand the role of optic flow in measuring this distance, the distance that is flown in a given environment. So now you can see that this is a very useful tool. And if you were to take this tool outside the laboratory, then here are some experiments where people have done just that. Now, in this experiment, what they did is that these researchers had the hive here, and they made the bee fly a particular distance, let's say X distance, over land. Okay, and then they also had the bees fly to an island over here, where they had to fly partly through land and partly through water, and then again through land to reach the feeder. Now, of course, what is going to happen is that the bees that go to this feeder are going to experience greater optic flow, whereas the bees that fly partially over land and partially over water are going to signal shorter distances to their hive mates, right? So these are experiments that people did in order to try and understand this sort of, the role of optic flow and this sort of honeybee odometry, in the field or in nature. Now, so, once the bee has found the feeder in this case, or flowers in nature, then what happens is that, once they find a bee finds flowers, then these successful foragers come back and they perform this waggle dance. And this waggle dance is followed by recruits or follower bees, which then, get cues or get clues from the dance itself, and they will visit the patch of flowers, making it very efficient to find food for the colony. Now, the Waggle dance will also recruit another set of bees, which are called processors. And these processors, what they do is they unload the supplies that are brought by the foragers, and then they sort of are involved in work such as, concentrating the nectar and then storing it away, collecting the pollen and storing it inside the cells and so on. Now, if there is a delay in recruiting foragers, then what happens is that the forager experiences that, that there is a delay, and therefore the waggle dance turns into something called a tremble dance. Okay, there is a distinct difference in a waggle dance and a tremble dance if you observe these bees. And these tremble dancers, they will recruit processors, but they will inhibit further waggling by returning bees. Okay, so you see that there is a feedback loop over here, which sort of regulates the supply and demand within, according to the supply, and demand within the colony. The whole foraging function is regulated by a huge number of bees within the colony. Now, coming to the last part of my talk, after which I can take questions, is that I just mentioned to you that this is a very nice tool, and we can exploit this tool to try and see how do bees forage in different kinds of landscapes. At the start of my talk, I mentioned that, one of the major issues that we are facing now is habitat modification, habitat alteration, fragmentation, conversion into plantations, conversion into agriculture. Now, we know very little, at least, for most of the Asian tropics and for much of the tropics, we know very little about how bees succeed in foraging and finding food in these different kinds of environments. Okay, so here is a hive that's placed in a particular habitat. And then what you do is that you train bees from here to go to a feeder like this. And you can see these bees at the feeder. We mark each of these bees, give them unique colors so that we can identify each and every bee that's coming to this feeder. And once the bees have found the feeder and they feed on sucrose solution from the feeder, then they go back to the hive, and then they perform this waggle dance, which is being watched by multiple bees, which then again, this cycle keeps on continuing. Yeah. So this experiment is repeated in different kinds of habitats. We have done this in paddy fields to try and understand, you have forests and then you have paddy fields. Do the bees actually fly across paddy fields in order to reach the forests? Do they avoid paddy fields? How do they behave in paddy fields? Rubber plantations is another kind of environment that we have looked at. We've also looked at forest environment. And then we've also looked at city environments. And in each of these experiments, in each of these habitat types, we have done these feeder experiments to try and understand how far do bees travel, how much of recruitment is there, how much do they waggle, what is the, how much of follower response, is elicited in these different habitats. There's a lot that one can learn about, foraging behavior and the suitability of these different habitats for bees using this, sort of readout. And here are some results, very brief results. And so we look, once the bee has come back, we record the dances. Okay. And then we see which are the locations that are being indicated in the dance. So here you have the hive in the center, and around the hive, these are radial circles around the hive. And all these points here indicate locations which are indicated by the bee through the waggle dance. So foragers that have come back to the hive have signaled all these different locations to find food. And this is what happens within rubber plantations. So you can see that in rubber plantations, they do tend to go about 400 odd meters. Okay, the furthest that they indicated through the dance is 400 meters. In rice fields, you can see that they tend to forage much closer to the hive. Okay, so they are not using this rice habitat or paddy fields the same way in which they're using a plantation habitat. Now, in forest habitat, again, you can see that this is quite similar to the rice field habitat. And this is probably because in a forest habitat, you have a diversity of flowers that are quite close to the hive. And so therefore, they don't really need to travel very far. Okay. In a city environment, again, this is what you see. Now, what we can find out, okay, and these are some, the data are not complete here. These are some preliminary results, is that we know today from some of these experiments that we have done, that when we look at our native Indian species, it appears that whether it be forest or rubber plantations or paddy fields or city environments, Indian native bees tend to forage much closer to the hive as compared to European bees or Western bees, okay, where it's recorded that they usually go even a kilometer or more. And this is a pattern that we are seeing consistently. Okay, so what can we take home from all of this? Okay, so we don't know, we know very little about how bees in our country or in our environment use space. Okay, how do they use different environments? How are they affected by different habitat modification pressures? What is it, how does it affect navigation in bees? We still don't know much about that. We don't know a lot about the status of bees. What is the population sizes of these bees in the wild? Which are the species that are declining? Which are the species that are thriving? Where is there a problem? Which species, which habitats are good? Which habitats are bad? Such kind of information is almost completely lacking. And then we also know, we also don't know the extent to which at least our plants are dependent on bees, except for a few studies in a few habitats. To a large extent, we don't know how dependent are our native Indian plants on bee pollination. Another thing that is a huge concern globally is how pesticides affect bees. We barely know anything about this, but what we do know is that pesticides are used indiscriminately in many of our agricultural systems across the country, be it vegetable crops or fruit crops or paddy fields, cereal crops, all of these things. Pesticides are used indiscriminately. And here is from one of the study sites that we were looking at. We also tried to look at, the toxicity of these pesticides. And you can see that very commonly, a lot of farmer fields, these numbers refer to farmers, use, or fields that are cultivated by farmers, use extremely toxic and toxic chemicals that are actually banned in several other countries. So we really don't know how this is all affecting our bee populations and what are the long-term effects that this is going to have on not only the bee population, but also on plant populations and crop productivity, food security, and so on. Okay, so therefore, I summarize, or I end here by saying that habitat modification and habitat destruction is a big issue that we are facing, and this is something that we need to know more about. Intensification of agriculture is another major concern. As more and more acreage comes under agriculture, this kind of habitat, how do bees behave in these habitats where there is lots of pesticides that are being applied? What happens to colonies of bees? What happens to their brood? All of this, how does it stress the bees' immunity and so on? Those are all unknowns. And then in our cities are also, there are gardens in cities, there are avenue trees in cities and towns. And so therefore, how do bees actually, thrive in these habitats? What are the threats to bees in these habitats? People often tend to remove beehives that, you must have seen beehives in buildings and so on. So people tend to remove those hives or burn the hives down. In effect, what you're doing is that you're burning pollinators down. These are like important for persistence of ecosystems, but what you see is that people are afraid and then they sort of get rid of beehives. And of course, we don't really understand the ecological needs or the biology of many of our native Indian bee species. So with that, I thank you. And this is my institution at IISER. We are in the middle of the Western Ghats. So it's a lovely location. And I'm happy to take any questions, if there are any.
Okay. Yeah, there's one question which I can see. And I also welcome the next speaker, Professor Sandeep Shukla. He has also joined. Yeah. So I'll take up the last question. Is there any similarity between thinking of human and thinking of honeybees? Or can we
Okay.
correlate the thinking of human and the thinking of honeybees?
It's a philosophical question what you just asked, right? How do we know the mind of a bee? right? It's hard for us to know what it is like to be a bee, right? We can only look at the behavior or the responses and record what we see. But how do we know the internal workings of a bee? There are some things that, of course, we can, study the neurobiology, neural processes, the brain structure, the brain function, and all those things. But what a bee is thinking or how a bee thinks is not something that, it's a very deep philosophical question. And I don't think, we would know the answer to that. But if you're talking about cognitive processes in bees, we do know there are studies that have shown, for example, that bees can, bees can tell numbers. Okay, for example, they can be trained, okay, using the same kinds of experiments that I have described, feeder training and stuff like that. They can actually identify which is less and more, so such concepts, or the concept of zero. These are things that people working on cognition and trying to understand, in these miniature brains, cognitive functions in these miniature insect brains have been able to try and understand that these are concepts that probably bees are able to sort of solve, or can approach. And also, problem solving. For example, people have shown that they can sort of extrapolate what they've learned in one situation to try and solve the problem in another situation. So these kinds of things, we can design experiments, but we will never be able to know what a bee is thinking. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Hema Somanathan, for such an enlightenment and insightful talk. And I would like to thank you once again on behalf of the National Academy of Sciences India Delhi chapter. And now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Professor Sandeep Shukla. Am I audible to you, sir? You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I am audible.
Okay.
You are audible.
Okay, fine. So I'll just share my screen. Okay. And I request my fellow panelist, Ms. Shweta, to kindly welcome Professor Sandeep Shukla. Shweta, can you hear me?
She's muted.
Can you unmute yourself, Shweta?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Very good evening to all the delegates and all our respected panelists who are present here for the second talk of today's webinar, which is on blockchain technology for societal good. And I welcome our esteemed speaker, Professor Sandeep Shukla, sir, who is here with us. Giving a brief introduction about Professor Shukla, I would like to say that Professor Sandeep A. Shukla, he is a professor of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Kanpur. He was head of the Department of Computer Science and Engineering from 2017 to 2020. He is currently a program director of the C3I Hub, a technology innovation hub for cybersecurity. He also is a joint coordinator of C3I Center, which is a research center for cybersecurity of critical infrastructure. Sir is also a joint coordinator of the National Blockchain Project. Before joining IIT Kanpur, he was a professor at Virginia Technology, USA, between 2002 and 2015. Professor Shukla is an IEEE Fellow and an ACM Distinguished Scientist and a Ramanujan Fellow as well. Among many awards that he has received, the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers in 2004 from the US President, Humboldt Foundation Bessel Award are some of the prominent ones. A very warm welcome to sir on behalf of the NASI chapter, DDUC, and I request you to start the talk for the day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. So I am not going to use slides because my understanding is that these are students and I think, I teach live sessions online for our students, and I know that this is quite there is a cognitive overload looking at the slides and so on. So I'll try to make it as interactive as possible. And the topic that I want to talk about today is about blockchain. Now, I would request the students to raise their hands. There is a raise hand feature, I believe, you on your screen. How many of you have heard of blockchain? So I see one person. Okay. How many of you have heard of Bitcoin? Okay. All right. So I see 3 hands, maybe a few more. But so let me tell you about blockchain and Bitcoin. So so first of all of you have heard about cryptocurrency. Well, you haven't heard, but you will hear if you read the news, because it's always on the news. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Monero, there are multiple different cryptocurrencies. Now, what is a cryptocurrency? So before I make you understand what is a cryptocurrency, you have to understand what is the currency, right? So every country, so in the very old days, we had exchanges, what we call barter system. Like I produce some milk in my farm and you produce rice, so we exchange rice against milk. Similarly, I get some gold by digging into some mine, and I give you gold and you give me, let's say, some food items, and that is the barter system that was prevalent long time ago. Now, at least in India, for almost 2000-3000 years, probably during the time of the Harappa Mohenjo-daro civilization, you have to actually have the right produce to barter against something that you need right now. And therefore, the concept of currency or coins were introduced. So you basically, every coin has a, or currency later on, which became, after paper became popular, specialized papers, then the currency notes, they actually have some value. Now, who decides that value, right? So you have 10 rupees, you have 15 rupees, 20 rupees, you have 50 rupees. Now, what is the value of 10, 20, 50 rupees? So this is determined by the market, right? So in my childhood, 10 rupees meant a lot of money, probably close to 500 rupees of now. But now even 500 rupees doesn't get you a whole lot of things. So that is determined by the economic conditions, the market value, the exchange rates, etc. But before we went to this kind of currency, for a long time, the gold standard was a currency. So the government of, or the king of a particular jurisdiction, they used to issue coins or notes based on the gold reserve they have in their treasury. Now, the gold standard was obliterated in the early 20th century, and most countries went for this fiat currency. So fiat currency means that the central bank of the country is empowered to produce currency, and that currency is produced based on various factors in the economy. For example, if there are too much currency produced, then there will be inflation. Everything will be very expensive. And if you produce too little currency, then there will be a lack of money circulating in the market, and therefore you will get a less what we call liquidity in the market, and there may be deflation. So fiat currency is what we have been using. Now, in the last 20-25 years, we started having what we call digital currency. What is digital currency? So when you get money from your employer or somebody else, that money is actually transferred from that person's account to your account through electronic means. You don't see a tangible, something you can touch like a currency note. And when you pay using internet banking or UPI, etc., you never see the actual currency. It is basically digitally transferred. So what is digital transfer? The digital transfer means that your bank account has a certain number, and the other person's bank account has a certain number as balance. And then when you transfer the money from your account to the other person's account, your balance will go down by the amount you're transferring, and the other person's balance will go up by that amount. Now, how this happens has a lot of mechanism, that there are intermediaries. There is a end of the day, there has to be some balancing acts and so on. But this is what digital currency is all about. Now, that kind of digital currency then led to the idea of payment wallets. So Paytm or Google Pay, etc., are what we call the payment wallets. So how does payment wallet work? You actually connect this wallet to your bank, and you say, let's say you want to put 2,000 rupees in your Google Pay. Then Google Pay has a bank account where from your account 2,000 rupees will be deposited, and Google Pay at that same time will make sure that your balance on the wallet is now 2,000 rupees. So now when you pay somebody, let's say a vendor, let's say 500 rupees, then what will happen is that vendor's Paytm wallet will rise. And that in turn means that at some point that 500 rupees remains in his wallet. It doesn't have to go to the bank because the wallet balance has come from you rather than from the bank. And then if he depletes all the money in the wallet, then he has to again go to the bank. Now, this is how the wallet system works. Again, that's kind of a digital money, but that's actually number game. There is no real money or currency notes that you are touching, or even withdrawing from ATM machine or from the bank. It's actually all number game. So similarly, in UPI setup, it's a little bit different. In UPI, when you make UPI payment, you basically have an address. Based on you get an UPI address, and then the other person, the person you are sending money, has an UPI address. So you issue a request from some application on your phone that I want to pay through UPI. This is my address, and that is that guy's address. And then you may have to type in a PIN number or something, and then that money actually goes to various intermediaries to that person's bank account. So UPI is different from wallets. That UPI now there may be UPI based wallets also, but UPI by itself is not a wallet. It's basically a kind of a protocol. Now this is how the banking system works and digital payments work. Now all these things require banks to be involved, right? Now in 2008, what happened is, and digital money has been a topic of interest by computer scientists and computational economists for since 1970s. But one problem is that there are before UPI and payment wallets and all these things, this number game things came up. There was the concept that we'll create currency which is not printed on paper, but which is actually some kind of a digital file or image or something. But then they realized that if you do that, counterfeiting will be extremely easy, because digital files can be copied. So you can actually put certain markers and so on, but they can also be digitally copied. So there was this concern. So there were a lot of different attempts at creating digital money. and then nobody was, nothing was very foolproof. So after 2000, in 2008, there was a banking crisis around the world, starting in the United States. And therefore, people were, and banks were mostly responsible for that meltdown because of their malpractices, various, I would say, aggressive practices in terms of giving loans and then taking insurance on the loan and then using that insurance to create digital assets and so on. So therefore, people were very upset about the banks. And unfortunately, no bank got punished, even if the banks actually were bailed out by giving the governments, like in the US and other places, they actually injected money, like almost free money, to these banks to keep the banks, in business. Because banks are very important for an economy, because banks create liquidity. Because if you have a barter system or any kind of other kind of system where usually the persons who has to give money, the lender and the receiver of the money or lendee, their timing may not match. So therefore, you bridge the gap by putting the money in the bank so that the lender can put the money in the bank, and then the borrower can actually take it at a later time. So banks, without banks, it is very difficult to run an economy that produces enough economic value for the country. So that is why the banks cannot be you cannot let banks fail. Some very small banks, if they fail, their impact on the economy is very small. But if the banks, if the banks are large, very large, like State Bank of India, if it fails, the Indian economy will be very, very badly affected. So therefore, these are called too large to fail banks. And this is what was the reason why 2008, 2009, a lot of money was infused, basically by creating currency by the central banks and putting them in the bank, and that created inflation in the system and so on and so forth. But at that time, inflation was required for lifting the economy from the slump that it was going through. So, and then if the economy slumps, then the companies, nobody produces, see, when the company produces the goods, they actually want consumers to buy them. Otherwise, they cannot, recover the cost of that production. But if the consumers have no money, then they cannot buy. And therefore, producers have to stop producing, and therefore there will be job loss. And if there is job loss, then there will be more people without money, and then it will go into a spiral, downward spiral, and that will make the economy really go collapse. And this happened to many countries many years ago. About 20 years ago, we saw this in Argentina. Then there the Argentinian money became so useless that people were just throwing them, burning them, etc. So banking system and how the economy is controlled is actually done by two things. One is called a fiscal policy, another is called a monetary policy. So fiscal policy is actually determined by the government, and the monetary policy is determined by the central bank of the country. So the 2008 banking, people are very upset that banks have not been punished, and they are getting actually free money for their own mistakes and own greed. So at that point, some guy called Satoshi Nakamoto, we don't know his real name, we don't even know who he was. He created a system in which the money will be created inside the system. There will be no relation whatsoever with the banking system. So the money will be created inside the system, and then people can earn that money by doing some work. And since it is completely a digital system, you cannot make them do labor work, right? So basically they have to invest in computing equipments and make those computing equipments do some work so that money can be earned. And the way the money is earned is by producing money. And this process is called mining, because it's like excavating gold from a mine. So now what is the and then the way he did it is very interesting. He said that I don't want any central entity like the central bank or banking system. I want people to actually be able to participate in this system and then have their computational resources do some work so that these computational resources can then solve some problems, and because they are solving the problems, I will they will be rewarded with some money, and that money then come into circulation because that guy will now use that money to buy various things, and therefore anybody who accepts that form of money can actually give them goods in exchange of that money. Now, so when he created this, he called it a Bitcoin. Bitcoin is because it's digital and it's a coins that you're creating, and the way it works is very, very interesting. So in this system, anybody can with their computer can connect to other computers like a game, like a multiplayer game kind of situation, where everybody can see what others are doing. For example, one participant, let's say he has some books he wants to sell. So he announces that in some other forum, like a website, and then somebody wants to buy that book. So this guy says, you can give me regular money or you can give me this particular form of money because I think this money will be the main money in the near future. So then this guy has to pay, and that is called a transaction. So you are getting a service or getting a product, and then you are paying the money. Now paying this money will be done by the following. So I have the money, so I will create a transaction saying that that other guy should now get this amount from my money. Let's say I have 25 coins and I have to pay him 2 coins. So I'll say that from me to Mr. X, 2 coins now will go. And then that 2 coin, this transaction is broadcast to everybody in the system. Everybody sees that Mr. X is giving Mr. Y 2 coins. So everybody now know that Mr. X and Mr. Y, Mr. X should have 2 coin less now, and Mr. Y will have 2 coin more, right? And so everybody sees that transaction. So when more and more transactions happen, everybody is seeing it. So everybody will now say that let me create a page of a account book, and this is what we call the ledger, right? So ledger one page is called a block. So I'll create a block. Now then, let's say there are 500 participants. All of them will create a block. Now the problem is that not everybody sees all the transaction at the same time, because some participant may be in the US, some may be in Brazil, some may be in India, some may be in Russia, some in France, and the network, the speed of the internet will determine who sees which one at what time. So therefore, when a participant is ready to create one of these blocks, he will include some transactions, whereas the person in another part of the world may create another block which has some of the transactions in common because they both saw them, but they might not see all the same transactions at the same time. So these 2 blocks will be different. Now, where these 2 blocks will be different, which block will be the page of the next page of the ledger, because ledger has pages and sequence. So this is where the computational resource comes in. And since there is no centralized person or centralized arbiter, I will answer the questions at the end. So some of the questions may get resolved by the what I will say. So you have this. There is no arbiter who will say, "Oh, this guy's block. This guy's block is better than this guy's block." So this has to come up automatically from the system, and this is what is called a consensus process. Now, how do you reach a consensus? So what Mr. Nakamoto's decided that let us give everybody a challenge problem, a complex computation problem, and whoever solves it first will be the winner. and he will make his block will be accepted as the next block. And all the other guys who were trying to make the block now should now go, move on to try to be the maker of the subsequent block. Not this block will be decided. So whoever has the more computation power will solve the problem faster, and they will then make the page, next page. And the others will now move on to do the next page. Now, how do the others know that a page has already been made? So this is done when everybody who has solved the problem broadcasts to everybody else on the network, hey, look, I have solved the problem, so my page is next. Now, this can also happen among like maybe 5 people have the same high computational resource, so all 5 will do that. So everybody will see a picture that where person 1 is saying my page is the next page, and the person 7 is saying my page is the next page, person 12 is saying my page is the next page. So now the question is that which will be the next page among these? The others could not even solve the problem yet, but they saw that somebody else solved the problem because of the broadcast. So they will stop making this page. They will move on to the next page. But the ones that already solved this problem will actually try to say that I have the next page. So in their own copy of the account book, they will insert their own page, and anybody who sees that, who is closer to that person, will also do the same. Now, then I have account book which at different parts of the world are different. Now, no bank has this kind of an account book where if you go to this branch, it will have a different account book, and if you go to that branch, it will have a different account book, right? So therefore, there has to be more resolution. Now, fortunately, this resolution happens when the subsequent pages are made. Now, if the subsequent pages when the subsequent pages are being made, it has to become the next page of the page that it was just made. Now, whoever has the ear of the most people, they will actually win, because let's say I am in a very I made the page, but I am in a very slow network. So by the time I circulated my page and it reached everybody else, somebody else's page reached everybody else, and therefore his page become persistent. Now, this is what is called a forking. This is what is called a split branching of the blockchain. Now, this Bitcoin has this branching problem. So therefore, in order to be sure that my page has been made, my page has been actually made permanent in the account book, I have to wait for 6 more pages to be made, so that the probability that my page will now not be actually accepted by everybody else reduces very, very substantially. So this is how probabilistically the account book gets made, and this account book is called the ledger. Now, how the pages sequence each other. So there is a process called hashing. So every page is actually hashed. Hashing is an algorithm that basically makes a summary of that page, and the page next to it has to include that summary, and that is what is called the hash linking. So this page sequence is determined by the hash linking. Now, what now happens is that, so I have an account book where I have pages which we call blocks, and they are linked with each other by the hash, by including the hash value of the previous page, so that anybody who wants to see who are the next page, he can just follow the hash links. So eventually what happens is that eventually this this sequence of blocks or sequence of pages become known to everybody else in participant, even though for a small time being, they might have a different account books, but over time the account books will all converge and everybody will have the same account book. And that is why this is called a blockchain, because you have blocks and they're chained by hash values. So Bitcoin, now the person who actually created the next page gets in the beginning, in 2008 to 12, they used to get 50 coins for free as reward for making the next page. Then after 4 years, it becomes 25 coins. And right now it is 12.5 coins. The reason why the reward is reducing because in the Bitcoin world, the total number of coins is 21 million. It will never, once it reaches 21 million, nobody get any reward. And at that time, they will collect what is called a transaction fee. If I include your transaction in my book, then you will pay me a transaction fee. So that is how they will pay for the computational resources. So this is how now this this blockchain has all these properties that you cannot go back and change a transaction, because if you do that, you have to create all the subsequent pages, and creating each page is a lot of computation because you have to solve a new challenge problem, and therefore nobody has that kind of computational power to actually do this, or even if they do, it will be very rare. And that's why Bitcoin still works. Now, Bitcoin price is determined by speculation. So Bitcoin's price is not determined. So fiat currency price is determined by the market conditions, economy, etc. But here, it is the investors. Some people mine these coins, and to mine these coins, they actually buy a lot of hardware to compute, to solve the challenge problem. And therefore, they have to recuperate that money. So they can sell their coins instead of using it for paying for some book or some goods. They actually can sell it in, and so there are what you call the Bitcoin exchanges. So they can go to an exchange. The exchange will say, okay, so right now the market price of a coin, let's say, is $40,000. So you can cash out your coin, and in that to cash out, you have to now write a new transaction saying that I am giving this coin to this exchange. So the exchange is also a participant in the system. So the exchange will now have the coin. Now let's say I go to the market and I say to an exchange, I say, well, I don't have computation resource to make my own coin, and I also don't know whether even if I buy so much computation resource, I may not be able to win the challenge round, and therefore I will buy it from you. So the exchange might say, well, I bought it for 40,000, so I'll sell it to you for 45,000. So this way the Bitcoin prices goes up. Now, one of the problem with Bitcoin is now most people actually buy the coins from the exchanges rather than trying to mine them. Now there are companies, the small companies who actually have who spend millions of dollars to buy very, very expensive hardware. They are so big that they will fill a whole building to mine Bitcoins. And the reason why they do that is because the amount of cost they incur to actually get those equipments and pay for the electricity, etc., is compensated by mining the coin and selling it to exchanges. So this is how the Bitcoin works. And then after Bitcoin, multiple different other blockchain-based currencies started coming up, like Ethereum, Monero, etc. Now, so this is how the system worked. And now the problem with this system is that, see, this guy, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he is, his identity is still not known. He came up with this in 2009, but his identity is still not known. So it's been 12 years. So we may not ever know who that person is. But his idea was very good, and he solved the problem of digitally creating money and also digitally doing transactions without any intermediary like a bank or anything about central bank. Now the participants who are in the system, what Nakamoto also did is that you don't have to tell who you are. You have to just create an identity, which is a code, what we call a cryptographic key. So it is very difficult to know who it is who is mining the coin, who it is who is selling the coin, who it is who is paying the coin to one person to the other. So this is what is called the anonymous network. So in this anonymous network, immediately attracted the attention of criminals. So there was a particular set of criminals. They created something called the Silk Road around 2012, and they started selling drugs, selling firearms, so even hiring killers to kill somebody. All this stuff was going on in the Silk Road. And how was it happening? See, if you are selling drugs, and the payment is in check, then chances of getting caught is very high, because banks check has to be encashed to bank. So most drug trades used to happen in cash. But handling large amount of cash when you are selling, let's say 1 kilogram of some drug will be very high, and nobody wants to go to the other drug criminal to pay that kind of money without protection and so on. So they started paying in cryptocurrency, and the drug will be shipped to you, and it will be packed in such a way so that the post office doesn't know what it is, and firearms the same thing, etc., etc. So eventually the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the US, they found it, and they actually could stop this. But stopping it required a lot of detective work, because there is no direct way to know who it is. So after that, we saw that cryptocurrency based crimes are still going on, but like for example, betting, right? So in India, betting for, let's say, when the cricket match is going on is illegal, but people still do it, right? But in the old days, people used to pay through bank or through actual cash, etc. And now they can actually do this over cryptocurrency network. And so betting is one problem. Then there is also what is called a Ponzi scheme. In a Ponzi scheme, somebody comes to writes to you email or whatever that I will make you very rich. You pay this much money. I will buy cryptocurrency for you, and then I hold it. And when cryptocurrency goes high up in price, I'll sell them and then give you the profit, or give a large percentage of my profit. So there are various of these schemes that are undergoing, and you don't know who that other person is, because his identity is just a number. That's a very random number. So therefore now the crime fighting agencies, or what is called law enforcement agencies, have now started looking very, very closely with this cryptocurrency networks. And in these cryptocurrency networks, there are ways to actually track the money trail, and eventually the money trail goes to an exchange. Now, in most countries in the recent years, the exchanges are basically registered businesses. And because they're registered businesses, any customer that they deal with has to do a know your customer, or KYC. So when they do KYC, so if the money trail eventually reaches an exchange where the person is cashing out the coin, then if the money trail can be followed, then you can actually catch who the last person was, because exchange has the person's KYC. And at that point, you can work backwards, arrest that guy and work backwards and see where the actual thing originated. So because of that, now the criminals have become clever. So they created services called mixers. So in the mixer services, what happens is that multiple people put money into the mixers, and the mixers then spread that money in different direction, go to another mixer, and this way they try to obscure their path of money trail. And this is one of the big problems that we are seeing. And mixers are not registered businesses, therefore they don't have KYC, and it's a very difficult thing. But there are efforts, and in our lab we actually do a lot of this work on tracking the crimes that are happening on cryptocurrency network. Now, the reason what I want to tell you is that cryptocurrency has been misused in many ways, including very, very bad criminal activities, and this is something that is a problem. But now we have a newer problem. The newer problem is not by criminals, but by greedy bankers. So what the greedy bankers are now saying that let's say I am a poor farmer. I don't have a whole lot of money, but sometimes I invest, let's say 50,000 rupees or maybe 10,000 rupees. So I normally put it in bank for interest, but the interest rate is low. So now sometimes I put it in the stock market. I buy shares, and if the share value goes up, I make some profit at that point by selling the share. But now they're saying that, well, don't do that, because cryptocurrency prices go up very fast. I can give you a lot more turnaround, a lot more profit if you actually sell the cryptocurrency. If you give me money, I'll buy cryptocurrencies, and then I will sell it, and you will get a lot of money. But instead of saying that, because people are a little bit worried about cryptocurrency, they will say, I have an investment product. Now, investment product is actually investing in cryptocurrency, but they say they gave it fancy name like crypto assets, and then they will sell it to this guy, many such farmers or many such not so well-to-do people, and then cryptocurrency prices may go up, and then they might actually make profit and give some money back to these guys. But there is a problem. The same problem that happened in 2008 when these loans were bundled into some kind of a asset. So cryptocurrency has one big problem. Remember, I said that the currency real value is dependent on the economy in the overall economy of the country, the price, the inflation, and all these things, which people can study and kind of get an idea what will happen in the next month or next year or next 5 years and so on. They may not always be correct, but has some ballpark, because there is a reason why the value of some money or some business shares go up or down. In cryptocurrency, things happen very randomly. For example, many of you have heard of Tesla car. So the owners of the Tesla production, Elon Musk, he tweeted several months ago that I am going to accept Bitcoin as a currency for buying Tesla. Immediately, people jumped to buy Bitcoin, and Bitcoin prices went up to $60,000. Few days later, this guy says that, I don't want to, I will take Dogecoin, but I will not take Bitcoin. And Bitcoin prices fell by 15,000 or so. Similarly, some days ago, El Salvador is a country which says, well, instead of our currency money, I will accept, I will make legal to pay with Bitcoin. Immediately, and that kind of spectacularly failed, and the price of Bitcoin again went down. Then China recently banned cryptocurrency transaction, prices go down. Sometimes there are some other disasters with some cryptocurrency exchange or so on, prices go down. So this way, the risk that you may not actually make profit, actually you may lose all the money that you invested, is very high. Now that risk is also with shares. When you buy a, let's say, company's Reliance share, if Reliance does not produce enough profit the next quarter, the prices will go down, and you cannot encash from your shares because prices went down. So now if you sell the share now, you will not make a whole lot of money. So you have to wait until Reliance share goes up. But at least there, the customer is told that, look, this is Reliance shares. Customer can actually follow in the news how Reliance is doing and know what are the risks there. But if you give an obscure security, obscure asset, and say that this will produce you a whole lot of profit without telling the customer that the risk is extremely high, even a celebrity tweets can actually bring down the price, then you are basically not doing a honest deal with the customers, with the especially very poor people who have very little money to invest. And so if they lose that money, that's a lot of loss. So in this situation, so that what can be done is a country can say that, well, I will allow this kind of businesses, but they have to be highly legally regulated. That is, if they do this kind of stuff, don't tell the customers what it is and what are the risks, and in a very, very elaborate form, then I'm going to punish them. And in fact, I can also punish them with fraud and other things, and can put them in jail and so on. So if you do that, then maybe this kind of assets can be floated in the market, so that people will get the full information that, well, what I'm doing is extremely risky. Maybe the profit is high, but instead of profit, the loss can be also very high. And so unless I am very sure I want to invest in such thing, I will not invest. So if I have only 10,000 rupees, I would rather put it in the bank and get 4% interest than taking so much risk. Now, if I have millions of dollars, then I might actually put some of the fraction of that money into such risky business. So this is the kind of thing that comes that can only happen if the regulation is very strict, and regulation is very legally enforced by law enforcement, and like things like ED and CBI and the financial crime bureaus and so on. They have to actually make sure that these businesses that are selling this kind of assets, investment assets, are very highly regulated and punished when they are not go by the regulation and so on. But then these people are saying that, well, if you do regulation, then we will not be able to do innovation. There may be a lot of different ways of using cryptocurrency as an investment opportunity. See, cryptocurrency is so expensive that regular people cannot invest in it. But what we are giving them is a fraction of ownership into that, and so on and so forth. They give all kinds of reasons. And I am telling I personally am trying to tell all government people I know that don't listen to them, because your citizens' economic security is much more important than innovation. Innovation is good, but innovation has to be regulated. Innovation cannot be done like 2008. 2008 also there was a lot of innovation about how to give loans to people who cannot really afford that loan, to actually divest the risk of that giving that loan by selling of the loan, and then creating assets based on that loan, and so on and so forth. And that is big innovation. People actually got a lot of bonus for doing that, and then few years down the line, the entire economic collapsed, take along with it Europe and Asian economy. So this is something that we have to be very careful about. But so what I'm trying to say, since you are very young and you are probably not doing investment, you are not doing this is not the age probably to do investment and so on. But in future, in 5 years, 6 years, 8 years from now, you will be in a position where you get your first job, you decide how to invest your money so that it grows for your future use and so on. And so you have to keep this kind of stuff in mind. And this is what where things like computer science meets the actual social science, right? Because all these things like economics is here, investment and accounting is there, and the idea of laws and regulation is there. So computer science by itself cannot solve this problem. You cannot have a computer science solution to bar this kind of things or protect against this kind of attempts. But if you also know other interdisciplinary things, or at least have consultation with people of this kind of things, then only you can actually tackle this kind of problems that often are brought in by very greedy commercial interests that try to make money. It's like cheat funds. If you're from Calcutta, for example, you might have seen that people lost a lot of money in cheat funds because they promised huge return, impossible return, like 15-20% return, which is not possible. And then they eventually collapsed. Multiple cheat funds collapsed, and a lot of poor people lost their simple, meager savings. So therefore, this is a problem that with proper regulation, government has to tackle. Now, finally, I don't want to take more of your time. You have been here for a while. I just want to say is that cryptocurrency is not what blockchain is all about. Blockchain is now being used for many things which are very good for the society, like for reducing corruption. Like, for example, we just finished implementing the land record registry of Karnataka government with blockchain, and we are going to actually launch that district by district in Karnataka in October, starting in October. That will reduce the possibility of corrupt practices in the registry and stamps offices and various tahsil and other practices. Similarly, we are doing a e-procurement solution on blockchain for the Karnataka government, and there also any kind of malpractices can be reduced by blockchain. But I think I don't have enough time today to actually say how we actually convert the cryptocurrency, which was the first application of blockchain, to the e-governance and reduction of corruption, etc., etc. But just keep that in mind that blockchain is not bad. Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies are, well, I won't call them bad, but they're very risky business, and proper regulation should regulate them. Whereas blockchain has many other applications that we actually do, where it is used for very good purposes for societal goods, and that's what that's where I think if you ever eventually go study computer science, etc., and work with blockchain, that is what you have to remember. But for everybody else who are not going to develop blockchain and so on, caution your parents and caution your relatives about investing in cryptocurrency, investing in any assets, any shares, etc., any kind of investment asset or investment vehicle that is related to cryptocurrency. They have to read everything possible about that before they put their money into that. And with that, I will finish, and I'll see what questions.
Professor Shukla, can you hear me?
So all you know is that some XYZ give money to ABC, and you don't know who that ABC is and who that XYZ is. So now, but Bitcoin is actually pseudo-anonymous, because we can actually analyze the money trail and eventually go back to an exchange where they have KYC, and we can actually de-anonymize them. So in that sense, it is bad, but this is also good in case there is a criminal transaction. Now, when the law enforcement goes to an exchange, it has to show a probable reason, like it has to have some kind of an order from a competent authority to produce to the exchange before the exchange gave them the KYC data. So you are not going to see innocent transactions being de-anonymized or identified. It will only be when there is a suspicion that that this transaction might be for ransomware payment or drug payment and so on. And so you need that for investigation purpose. So assuming that the law enforcement agencies are honest and they have shown probable cause, only then this de-anonymization can happen. So yeah, but this is a good question, because when we say anonymous, it's not really anonymous, at least in Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. It's pseudo-anonymous. Can we design an efficient architecture that drive Indian economy for money control? Well, see, you don't see. Yesterday, I was reading a speech by the RBI chairman, and it talks about evolution of money, evolution of the market of all these things, and you don't change money, architecture of money overnight. It happens through small incremental changes and evolution. But I don't know what efficient architecture will be, but money, all these things are, we computer scientists often have the wrong impression that all problems can be solved by technology, but it is not the case. So economy is not something you can fix by technology alone. You need economic sense, you need economic theories, you need various other policy, you need regulation, you need laws, for regulating businesses and so on. And various things are there. So you don't really solve all problems in life with technology, which often even I see very highly positioned people in the government and so on think that, okay, if I throw in a app or throw in a web-based application, this problems can be solved, but it doesn't work like that. Will you please tell us how can we ensure that we are safe during the exchange of cryptocurrency? Well, I tell everybody, and I personally believe that you should not be dealing with cryptocurrency. So, but that is my personal opinion. So in that case, you will be safe because you are not dealing with cryptocurrency. But if you are, then you have to be careful. Don't fall for any kind of trap that you are going to get some high profits if you invest or do betting and all that stuff. You have to know which nodes, which participants may have been flagged already as malicious or as criminals. Those lists are often published. Marked lists are often published on various like Etherscan for Ethereum or Bitcoin.info, etc. So you have to do your own due diligence. So let's see what is the other question. Why was it necessary to keep the identities of people who are transacting anonymous? What will happen if the identities are known? Can the blockchain system be replicated where all identities are known? Yes. So we didn't talk about permission blockchain, where so Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. are permissionless blockchain. That is, anybody can just join and start transacting and create their own identity and announce that this is my identity and so on. But there are permission blockchains, especially the kind of applications I was talking about in e-governance and all. Every person is known. They have digital certificate or some way they have been identified, and somebody signed that this person is genuine. Now you can also have a like bank blockchain. Banking transactions can be also put in a blockchain, but see, anonymity is important. Because because there is a possibility some people will misuse the system, doesn't mean that you don't do the thing. So, for example, bank also is used by a lot of criminals. There people have left the country by taking huge amounts of loans, as you know. So that doesn't mean that we should stop giving loans, because then the economy will halt. So similarly, anonymity is important for privacy. You don't need to, like if I am buying something, not everybody else needs to know that I have I buy this thing. Now, given that privacy, the cloak of privacy is often used by attackers to act, or bad people to misuse, like drug cartel and all that stuff. So we have to have proper forensics capabilities, and follow the money trail all the way to exchanges and so on, to figure out who they are, etc. So just because of those people, we cannot not have anonymity. So that's anonymity is important for privacy. Now, how much digital market secure in future? Not secure at all. Now, how much digital market secure in future? I think when human mind attend advanced level, digital market much unsecure. Please comment. Digital market is also very insecure even today. Thankfully, the digital markets are highly regulated. There are cybersecurity regulations they have to do, but even then, it's not that secure, especially digital wallets. That's why there is a regulation. The RBI regulation is that you cannot make transactions beyond, let's say, 2,000. I don't know the exact number, 2,000 rupees, etc. on these wallets, because they are not very secure. So the regulation basically is designed to save the people who are using this, so that we can actually have at least some kind of a protection. Same thing with the with the credit card payments or UPI payments, etc. OTPs and stuff are there to protect you, but there are criminals who know how to even circumvent those. So there are insecurity already built in, and that will increase. And we have to figure out how to circumvent those things. As dark web is operated by multi-layer cover, is Bitcoin also done through anonymously? So is it possible to ban all scams in dark web and crypto? See, who will ban it, right? So because these are, see, digital world is actually not contained in a single jurisdiction. So I can ban it in my country, but then it's internet. They have IP addresses. People can go using VPN of another country. They can go and still use those things, right? So this is the biggest challenge, that it's a multi-jurisdictional effort to actually solve any of these crimes. The crime may be performed from another country, and you may not have friendly relation with that country, and you may not be getting the law enforcement between the countries cooperate. Governments of individual country and create a common pool like they do in pool mining. I don't know. I mean, so not every country will actually agree on these things. Even we don't have a non-proliferation treaty of cyber weapons. We see cyber weapons are being used by governments on their citizens all the time. And nuclear proliferation treaty, most countries have signed. So they say that they will not develop further nuclear weapon, and they're not going to use it on their own people, or they will not be the first attacker on any nuclear conflict. This kind of treaties are facilitated by UN and all that stuff. Unless this various international bodies like UN come into picture and make an effort to actually come with a solution that is, so UN actually recently started an effort, but China, Russia, etc. may not, they are not agreeing to things that US and other countries want, and that is a big problem. So yeah, so I think the cyber situation in the so as I am trying to say to you is that science by itself or technology by itself doesn't solve all problems. So policy, diplomacy, economics, even history, all those things have to be considered for holistic problems where human rights, human security, food security, economic securities are concerned. You cannot solve these problems just by technology. And that's the message that I want to give, that Satoshi Nakamoto thought that by creating this platform, which is very innovative, he would solve the problem that happened in 2008-9 in terms of banking crisis, but it hasn't solved them, and it will not solve it, because now people have found cryptocurrency, instead of using loans as a way of creating risky investment vehicles. They are now using cryptocurrency as that, and they are calling it DeFi or decentralized finance and all kinds of fancy names. But in reality, it doesn't. Yeah, so more technology you bring in. Everything has a some kind of a good side and bad side. Technology is not needed. You cannot go back to primitive lifestyle, but technology gives you efficiency. Technology gives you inclusivity. Technology gives you various other opportunities. But security is becoming a large problem, and using technology, people actually misuse technology for various purposes. So yeah, so I think one has to remember that. So don't stop doing technology or developing technology, but think in terms of security from the very beginning when you start new technology, and think about the other ways of controlling various things that you cannot control by by technology, like proper regulation, proper policies, proper frameworks, and law enforcement activities. Yeah, so I think that the projected, I forgot the exact date, but I think the 21 million will happen by 2040. So then there will be no more coins to mine. Then you will have to actually, so whoever makes the next block will actually make it through transaction fees. So that's the plan. But 2040 is far away. By then, the whole cryptocurrency may go away, and because the government is now talking about the central bank issued digital currency, or CBDC. But you may want to know about it. China has already started CBDC. India is contemplating doing CBDC. So once the CBDC comes in, maybe the cryptocurrency will only be used by some people who are really into very risky things, risky investments. Most people will be using central bank issued digital currency, hopefully in next few years, in most countries. And that will actually, they might change, and then it doesn't matter whether Bitcoin reaches 21 million or not. So that might also happen. So we don't know, like the technology space is evolving like really fast. What is the mining of Bitcoin means? We generate no. So see, how does our Reserve Bank generate money, right? So they decide that we are going to issue this much currency in the economy. They push the currency. So that's the based on the monetary policy. So similarly, Bitcoin decided that the originator of Bitcoin decided that we will be slowly pushing more and more coins into the system, but we'll eventually have to taper it off. The reason for tapering it off is that anything that is in extreme abundance, if gold was very everywhere, like iron, then gold will not be a precious metal, right? So similarly, scarcity is very important for sustaining the value of money. So that's why he said that it will be 21 million. But so that how do you create the currency? Because you are not connected to banks. The only way to create currency is by saying that here is 25 coins, or here is 50 coins. Now, do you give it for free? Because then the value will not have much if something is free. So then you work for it. You work for it by creating, solving puzzles computationally. And that's how the coin is created. Ajanta has asked, like, e-rupee was inaugurated. Is it central currency? No, it is not a currency at all. It is actually a coupon. So basically it makes the UPI, using UPI, easy. So let's say you are not so phone savvy, right? You don't know how to use UPI wallets, etc. So somebody creates a e-rupee and send it to you, and that e-rupee will only be accepted by some businesses. So you can use that e-rupee in that business. But basically what you are doing is that person created used the UPI to basically put some money in the coupon, and that coupon is basically being used for the other one in the other place. So it's basically a layman's way of using the UPI. So it's not a currency at all. It's basically a rupee, as if you are basically let's say sometimes in shops what happens is that I go to the shop, the shopkeeper says, I don't have 10 rupees change, I'm going to write a cheat for you. And next time you show me the cheat, and I will assume that 10 rupees you are giving. So same thing, e-rupee is something like that. All right, I think it's time. So we'll stop here. And any questions? I think
you have taken up, I think, nearly all possible questions.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'll say the longest question answer session which has taken place till now. Thank you very much, Professor Sandeep. And the best part of your talk is that without any slide, without taking any help of an external documents, you have been able to handle the whole session and take up all the questions. And I think that the amount of questions which have been generated because of your talk and the way you have answered each one of them must be really a satisfying experience. Shweta, any concluding remarks from your side?
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for such an interesting and enlightening talk. In fact, it was thoroughly engrossing one, and the certain important messages that you have given to the coming generation. I think you've said that after 7 or 8 years, once they will be in a position to invest money, when our current students will be in that position, then yes, the message is that they can take the advantage of this cryptocurrency, they can take advantage of this Bitcoin thing, but at the same time, they have to be very cautious. It's a risky way of investment. So that should be a very strong message to all of them, since you're already working in this area. And yes, message to any of the researchers who are present here was, sir just mentioned, and we picked it up. It was thank you that you even gave direction to them, that tracking criminals who are there on this cryptocurrency network, that is one area that is really an enriching area which we can further explore. Thank you so much, sir, for such an enlightening talk.
Thank you very much, Professor Shukla. And there were few comments which I have received through the Telegram also. They are asking that, is it possible that if we can upload your session on YouTube? I said that I have to take a permission from the speaker in that case, first of all.
Definitely. In fact, if you do that, send me a link too.
Oh, sure. I'll do that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.